The morning sun painted the military base in golden hues as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her uniform one final time. She had been preparing for this day for months, knowing that today would be different from any other day in her 12-year military career. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at precisely 0800 hours, and as the lead coordinator, every detail rested on her shoulders. Maria had joined the military straight out of high school, driven by a deep sense of duty and a desire to serve her country. Over the years, she had proven herself time and again, earning the respect of her peers and superiors alike. Her dedication was unwavering, her commitment absolute. Today, she was responsible for organizing a memorial ceremony for fallen soldiers, an event that would honor the ultimate sacrifice made by brave men and women in service. The base was buzzing with activity as preparations reached their final stages. 500 Marines had arrived from various units across the region to participate in this solemn ceremony. The sight of so many uniformed personnel moving with purpose and precision was both inspiring and humbling. Each Marine carried themselves with the dignity and honor that their training had instilled in them. As Maria walked through the ceremonial grounds, she noticed the heat was already becoming oppressive despite the early hour. The weather forecast had predicted temperatures reaching well over 90 degrees, but the ceremony could not be postponed. Too many families had traveled long distances to attend, and too many arrangements had been made to consider changing the date. The families of the fallen soldiers began arriving shortly after sunrise. Maria watched as mothers clutched photographs of their sons. Fathers stood with stoic expressions, masking their grief, and siblings tried to maintain their composure in the face of overwhelming loss. Children, too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, stayed close to their parents, sensing the heavy emotions that surrounded them. Maria had personally reviewed every aspect of the ceremony multiple times. The flag presentation had been practiced until it was flawless. The honor guard had rehearsed their movements until they could perform them with eyes closed, and the speakers had prepared remarks that would honor the deceased while providing comfort to the grieving families. Nothing had been left to chance. Among the preparations, Maria had also arranged for medical personnel to be on standby. With the combination of extreme heat, emotional stress, and the physical demands of standing at attention for extended periods, she knew that some attendees might need medical assistance. She had requested additional water stations and shaded areas, but the formal nature of the ceremony limited how much accommodation could be made. The Marine Corps band took their positions as the ceremony time approached. Their instruments gleamed in the morning sunlight, and their uniforms were impeccably pressed. These musicians would provide the soundtrack to a day of remembrance, their melodies carrying the weight of honor, sacrifice, and national pride. As the ceremony began, Maria positioned herself at her designated post, maintaining the perfect posture that had been drilled into her through years of military training. The opening remarks began, delivered by a commanding officer whose voice carried across the silent assembly. The only sounds were his words, and the gentle rustling of flags in the warm breeze. The heat continued to intensify as the morning progressed. Maria could feel perspiration beginning to form beneath her uniform, but she remained motionless, her attention focused on ensuring everything proceeded according to plan. Around her, 500 Marines stood in perfect formation, their discipline evident in every straight line and synchronized movement. The first speaker, a chaplain, approached the podium to deliver words of comfort and remembrance. His voice was steady and compassionate as he spoke about the courage of those being honored and the debt of gratitude owed by a grateful nation. The families listened intently, drawing strength from his words, even as their hearts ached with loss. As the chaplain continued his remarks, Maria noticed that the heat was becoming more intense than she had anticipated. The sun beat down relentlessly on the assembled crowd, and she could see that some of the attendees were beginning to show signs of discomfort. She made mental notes to have additional water brought to certain areas after this portion of the ceremony concluded. The formal presentation of colors came next, with the honor guard moving with the precision and grace that exemplified Marine Corps excellence. The American flag, along with the flags of the various military branches, were presented with the reverence and respect they deserved. The sight of these symbols of freedom and sacrifice stirred emotions in everyone present. Maria felt a surge of pride as she watched her fellow Marines perform their duties with such professionalism. Despite the challenging conditions, every member of the ceremony was maintaining their composure and dedication to honoring the fallen. This was what military service meant, placing duty and honor above personal comfort. The memorial portion of the ceremony began with the reading of names. Each fallen soldier was honored individually, their names spoken clearly and with respect. As each name was read, a bell tolled, its solemn sound echoing across the base and serving as a reminder of the price of freedom. During this portion, Maria noticed that the combination of heat, emotion, and prolonged standing was taking its toll on some attendees. She saw a few family members being quietly escorted to shaded areas, and medical personnel discreetly providing assistance where needed. The Marines in formation, however, remained steadfast in their positions. As the ceremony progressed, Maria began to feel the effects of the heat more acutely. Her throat felt dry despite having hydrated thoroughly before the event began, and she could feel her uniform becoming damp with perspiration. Still, she maintained her position, knowing that her role required her to be visible and available throughout the entire ceremony. The keynote speaker, a decorated general, approached the podium to deliver the main address. His presence commanded attention, and his words carried the weight of experience and wisdom earned through decades of military service. He spoke of sacrifice, honor, and the unbreakable bonds that unite those who serve in uniform. As the general's speech continued, Maria felt an unusual sensation beginning to overtake her. The world seemed to shimmer slightly around the edges, and she realized that the heat was affecting her more than she had initially recognized. She tried to regulate her breathing and maintain her focus, but the symptoms were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The ceremony was approaching its climax with the final tribute, a moment that would require her full attention and presence. Maria drew upon her training and inner strength, determined to see the ceremony through to its completion. The families deserved nothing less than her absolute best, and she would not allow personal discomfort to detract from this important moment. Around her, the 500 Marines continued to stand in perfect formation, their dedication evident in their unwavering posture, despite the challenging conditions. The sight of their commitment provided Maria with additional motivation to maintain her own standards of excellence. As the final speaker concluded his remarks and the ceremony moved toward its conclusion, Maria felt the world beginning to tilt around her. The heat, the emotional weight of the ceremony, and the physical demands of her role were combining in ways she had not anticipated. Despite her best efforts, she realized that her body was reaching its limits. The final phase of the memorial ceremony was underway when Maria felt her vision beginning to blur. She had been standing in the scorching heat for over 2 hours, maintaining perfect military bearing while coordinating one of the most important events of her career. Her commitment to excellence had always been unwavering, but her body was now sending signals that she could no longer ignore. The honor guard was preparing for the final flag-folding ceremony, a sacred tradition that would conclude the memorial service. This was the moment that families had been waiting for, the final tribute to their loved ones, who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Maria knew that every detail had to be perfect, that any disruption could forever tarnish the memory of this solemn occasion. As she watched the honor guard move into position, Maria felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The edges of her vision began to darken, and she could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She tried to steady herself by focusing on her breathing, a technique that had served her well during countless challenging moments throughout her military career. The temperature had climbed to nearly 100 degrees, and the combination of her heavy dress uniform, the emotional weight of the ceremony, and the prolonged period of standing at attention was taking its toll. Maria had always prided herself on her physical and mental toughness, qualities that had helped her excel in a demanding military environment where weakness was not tolerated. Around her, the 500 Marines maintained their positions with the discipline and precision that defined their service. These men and women had traveled from bases across the region to participate in this ceremony, understanding that their presence honored not only the fallen but also the families who had sacrificed so much. Their commitment was evident in every straight line of their formation. The chaplain began the final prayer, his voice carrying across the silent assembly. Maria tried to focus on his words, drawing strength from the spiritual comfort he was offering to the grieving families. She had always found solace in these moments of reflection, times when the larger purpose of military service became crystal clear, despite the personal costs involved. But as the prayer continued, Maria felt her strength beginning to ebb. Her legs, which had supported her through countless hours of standing at attention during her 12-year career, began to feel unsteady. The perfectly pressed fabric of her uniform now felt heavy and constricting, and she could feel perspiration beading on her forehead despite her efforts to maintain her composure. The families in the front rows were completely absorbed in the ceremony, their attention focused on honoring their loved ones. Maria could see the pain in their faces, the way they held on to each other for support, the careful way they maintained their dignity in the face of overwhelming grief. Their courage in attending this ceremony, knowing how difficult it would be, inspired her to continue pushing through her own physical discomfort. As the honor guard began the precise movements of the flag-folding ceremony, Maria realized that her vision was becoming increasingly unclear. The Marines performing the ceremony moved with practiced precision, each fold of the flag executed with the reverence and respect that the symbol of their nation deserved. This was a moment that required absolute perfection, and any disruption would be unthinkable. The lead sergeant of the honor guard, a veteran with 20 years of service, approached the family of the first fallen soldier. His movements were deliberate and respectful as he prepared to present the folded flag to the widow, a young woman whose husband had been killed in action just 3 months earlier. This moment would forever be etched in her memory. And Maria knew that everything had to proceed flawlessly. Despite her growing discomfort, Maria maintained her position. Her training had taught her that duty comes before personal comfort, that the mission must always take precedence over individual needs. She had seen other Marines push through challenging conditions, and she was determined to uphold the same standard of excellence that had defined her entire career. The heat seemed to intensify with each passing minute. The sun beat down mercilessly on the assembled crowd, and Maria could see that even some of the seasoned Marines were beginning to show signs of strain. However, their discipline remained unbroken, their commitment to the ceremony absolute. This was what separated the military from civilian life, the willingness to endure hardship for a greater purpose. As the first flag was presented to the grieving widow, Maria felt another wave of dizziness. The widow accepted the flag with trembling hands, clutching it to her chest as tears streamed down her face. The sight of her grief was both heartbreaking and inspiring, a reminder of the real human cost of military service and the families who bear that cost alongside their loved ones in uniform. The ceremony continued with the presentation of the second flag. Maria watched as another family received their tribute, a father accepting the flag that had covered his son's casket. The man's stoic expression could not hide the pain in his eyes, but he stood tall and proud, honoring his son's service even in the midst of his own suffering. The third flag presentation began, and Maria felt the world beginning to spin around her. She tried to grip the small podium next to her position, hoping to steady herself without drawing attention. The last thing she wanted was to create a disruption during such a sacred moment. Her commitment to professionalism had always been absolute, and she would not allow her personal struggles to interfere with this important ceremony. The Marine presenting the third flag was a young corporal who had served alongside the fallen soldier. His voice was steady as he spoke the traditional words of condolence, but Maria could see the emotion in his eyes. These were not just ceremonial duties for him. He was honoring a friend, a brother in arms who would never come home. As the flag was presented to the third family, Maria felt her knees beginning to buckle. The heat, the emotional weight of the ceremony, and the physical demands of maintaining perfect military bearing for over 2 hours were finally overwhelming her body's ability to cope. She tried once more to steady herself, determined to see the ceremony through to its completion. The fourth flag presentation was beginning when Maria realized that she could no longer maintain her position. Her vision was tunneling, and she could feel herself losing consciousness despite her desperate efforts to remain alert. The last coherent thought that passed through her mind was a prayer that her collapse would not disrupt the ceremony or dishonor the memory of the fallen soldiers being honored. In that final moment before losing consciousness, Maria saw the faces of the grieving families, the steady bearing of her fellow Marines, and the folded flag being presented with such care and reverence. She had given everything she had to ensure this ceremony honored the fallen with the dignity they deserved. And, as darkness overtook her, she held on to the knowledge that her duty had been fulfilled to the best of her ability. The sound of her body hitting the ground was barely audible over the chaplain's voice. But the 500 Marines who had been standing at perfect attention immediately recognized what had happened. Without breaking formation or disrupting the ongoing ceremony, they began to respond in a way that would demonstrate the true meaning of military brotherhood and the respect they held for one of their own, who had given everything in service to others. The moment Maria collapsed, a ripple of awareness passed through the ranks of 500 Marines standing in formation. Without a single spoken word or formal command, something extraordinary began to happen. These men and women, trained to maintain discipline and composure under the most challenging circumstances, recognized that one of their own had fallen while serving with honor and dedication. The ceremony continued without interruption. The chaplain maintained his steady voice as he offered the final blessing, and the honor guard proceeded with the last flag presentation. Medical personnel, who had been strategically positioned throughout the ceremony grounds, immediately but discreetly moved toward Maria's position. Their training allowed them to provide assistance without creating a disturbance that would detract from the solemn moment. As the medics reached Maria and began their assessment, something unprecedented occurred. The Marine standing closest to where she had fallen, a gunnery sergeant with 15 years of service, made a decision that would resonate throughout the entire assembly. Without breaking the silence of the ceremony or drawing attention to himself, he slowly came to attention and rendered a perfect salute in Maria's direction. The Marine standing next to him noticed the gesture and immediately understood its significance. This was not about protocol or regulations. This was about recognizing courage, dedication, and the kind of selfless service that embodied everything the Marine Corps represented. The second Marine also came to attention and rendered his salute, joining his fellow serviceman in honoring their fallen colleague. The gesture spread like a wave through the formation. One by one, each Marine recognized what was happening and made the personal decision to participate in this spontaneous tribute. They had all witnessed Maria's dedication throughout the ceremony, seen her unwavering commitment to ensuring that the families of the fallen received the honor and respect they deserved. Her collapse was not a sign of weakness, but rather evidence of her complete devotion to duty. The families attending the ceremony began to notice the subtle change in the formation. What they saw was 500 Marines, standing in perfect military bearing, rendering salutes with the same precision and respect typically reserved for the flag or senior officers. But this salute was different. It was a gesture of peer recognition, a tribute from one warrior to another who had given everything in service to others. The commanding officer presiding over the ceremony observed what was happening and made an immediate decision. Rather than correcting what might technically be considered a deviation from protocol, he recognized the profound significance of the moment. This spontaneous tribute represented the very essence of military values: honor, courage, and commitment to fellow service members. He allowed the salute to continue, understanding that sometimes the most meaningful gestures arise not from regulations, but from the heart. Meanwhile, the medical team worked quickly and professionally to assess Maria's condition. She had suffered from heat exhaustion combined with dehydration, conditions that were serious but treatable with proper care. As they prepared to transport her to the medical facility, she began to regain consciousness. Initially confused about her surroundings but gradually becoming aware of what had transpired. Through her recovering vision, Maria saw an image that would remain etched in her memory forever. 500 Marines, standing in perfect formation, rendering salutes in her honor. The sight was overwhelming, not because of the recognition it represented, but because of what it said about the bonds that unite those who serve together. These Marines understood that her collapse was not a failure but rather the natural result of someone who had pushed herself beyond her limits in service to others. The final words of the ceremony were spoken, and the chaplain offered the closing benediction. As his voice carried across the assembly, the salutes continued, creating a scene of such profound respect and unity that many of the attending family members were moved to tears. They understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a demonstration of military brotherhood that transcended rank, gender, and individual differences. As the ceremony concluded and the families began their processions to pay final respects, the Marines maintained their salutes. The gesture had evolved from a spontaneous tribute into a formal recognition of everything that Maria represented. Her dedication to ensuring the ceremony honored the fallen, her willingness to push through personal discomfort to fulfill her duties, and her complete commitment to serving others embodied the highest ideals of military service. The base commander, who had been observing from his position at the front of the assembly, approached the formation. His own 30 years of military service had shown him many examples of courage and dedication. But this moment was unique. Here was a display of respect that had emerged naturally from the ranks, a demonstration that the values of the military were not just taught but truly lived by the men and women who served. Word of what had happened began to spread beyond the immediate ceremony. Other personnel on the base, who had not been part of the memorial service, learned about Maria's collapse and the subsequent tribute from their fellow Marines. The story resonated throughout the military community because it represented something that every service member understood: the willingness to sacrifice for others and the bonds that form between those who share that commitment. Maria was transported to the medical facility where she received treatment for heat exhaustion and dehydration. As she recovered, a steady stream of visitors came to check on her condition. Marines from the ceremony, base personnel, and even some of the family members who had attended the memorial service wanted to express their appreciation for her dedication and to ensure she was receiving proper care. The story of what happened that day began to reach beyond the military base. Local news outlets picked up the account, and soon the image of 500 Marines standing in salute for their collapsed colleague was being shared across social media platforms. People from all walks of life were moved by the demonstration of respect and unity, seeing it as an example of the values that defined military service. Letters began arriving at the base from civilians who had heard about the incident. Teachers shared the story with their students as an example of honor and dedication. Veterans wrote to express their pride in seeing the military values they had served to uphold being demonstrated so powerfully by a new generation of service members. Families who had lost loved ones in military service found comfort in knowing that such respect and brotherhood existed among those who continued to serve. Maria's recovery was swift, and within days, she was back to full duty. But the impact of that ceremony day continued to resonate throughout her career and beyond. The image of 500 Marines rendering salutes in her honor became a symbol of what military service truly meant. Not just individual courage and dedication, but the bonds of brotherhood and mutual respect that unite those who answer the call to serve. Years later, as Maria continued her military career and eventually retired with full honors, she would often reflect on that day. The heat, the exhaustion, and even the momentary embarrassment of collapsing during such an important ceremony paled in comparison to the profound experience of witnessing such an outpouring of respect from her fellow Marines. It was a reminder that true strength comes not from never falling, but from the knowledge that when you do fall, your brothers and sisters in arms will be there to honor your service and help you stand again. The memorial ceremony that day accomplished its intended purpose of honoring fallen soldiers and providing comfort to their families, but it also created an unexpected moment of unity and respect that would be remembered long after the formal tributes were complete. In the spontaneous decision of 500 Marines to render salutes for their fallen colleague, the true spirit of military service was displayed for all to see. A spirit of mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and unbreakable bonds forged in the commitment to serve something greater than oneself.